Welcome to the BEZA Performance live stream. My name is Marshall Henley. I'm the president of BEZA Performance, and today is S&OP Thursday. Today we're going to be talking about executive presentations with Doug Dedman of DBM Systems. Again, let me get Doug up here. Welcome, Doug.
Oh, good to be here, Marshall.
This is a bit of the, I don't want to say the punchline, but it's kind of the big thing we've been working towards. It's not the only thing we're going to be covering in this current series, which is called What Does Good Look Like? But what we've said is the executive presentation and the executive participation in that presentation is pretty critical. So we've been trying to kind of get to this early, but tee up the things ahead of time that are important. So why don't you just take it away? We'll pull your stuff up on the screen. We can start talking about it.
Sure. Yeah. So we, as you just mentioned, right, we've been going through how good, what does good look like, and we'd identified 8 areas, and these 8 kind of major areas that we've got. We've covered family structure, we covered the monthly process, and really at the culmination of the monthly process, we get to the executive presentation.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what we want to cover today. And I think it's pretty important because one of the things that we've been covering as we've been talking about this over the last month or month and a half, I guess, really, has been kind of a quick way to assess your how good is your process, right? And
Right.
really the focus of that is on how well does that process work, and a few questions that you can ask. And those questions that we went through all tie to the executive S&OP presentation. And so I don't know if you want to pull them up on the screen, but the ones that we really kind of talked about were, is your executive S&OP meeting a report out or a decision-making meeting, right?
Right.
Can you get through the entire business in 1 to 1.5 hours? Does everyone walk out of the executive S&OP meeting on the same page and ready to execute the plan?
Mm-hmm.
And really, finally, is the senior executive engaged in the meeting? Well, it's kind of obvious that all of those questions tie to that culminating part of the executive S&OP process, which is the executive meeting. And today we're going to talk about, well, what's the best way to present the data in the executive S&OP meeting to actually facilitate and get to be able to answer yes to all of the questions that are on here. So
I know we've got a ton of stuff to show today, so I'll probably not ask as many questions as I normally do. I might jump in, but I guess, folks, we're going to let Doug kind of take it away, and I'll be listening too.
Yeah. So really, I think I want to start with the punchline, and then we'll kind of go from there, right? So what do I see as the secret sauce in the effective executive presentation to get to the points that we had on the last slide? The first one is you want to present family by family. And the second one is you want to use a standard presentation for each of the families. And it's as simple as that. So I'm done my presentation.
Yeah, we're done. Family by family, as opposed to, are you going to get into that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's worth. I think it's worth talking about that for a minute just before we jump into the why family by family. And Marshall, you've sat in many executive S&OP presentations as well, right? Similar to you and I, especially as we start working with companies, we'll often be sitting in those together, and it's not atypical to see a presentation that's formatted in a way where there's some sort of financial view at the beginning, then
Yes.
sales goes through all of their slides, right? And they're presenting everything they're doing on a sales side. And then it flips over to operations. And usually by then we're an hour into the presentation and we've only got 15 minutes left. And then operations has to cover everything that they're going to do on their side. And that's kind of how it's structured. Yeah.
I mean, 90% of them until we kind of introduce these ideas, I think that's how they've run. I mean, that's almost always how they've run.
Yeah, and it's because one of the challenges is that it can be difficult to think about how do I put a cohesive view together for each of the family. But I'll tell you that having that family by family presentation actually focuses the conversation much clearer, right?
Right.
Because really you're forcing, let's call it, both sides of the equation, right? The sales and the operations side, to really go through the presentation at the same time. That's a pretty critical piece. So
I know we're going to get into the presentation, but it's also just so hard to go through that long sequence you described and then see the connections. And even with a presentation that's consistent, I'm not sure you would see the connections if you go in that sequence.
yeah,
So
yeah, and often I'll be sitting there as I go through that, is I'll be trying to make some notes as the sales team is going through. And then when it gets to the operations side, I'm thinking, okay, we talked about this. We talked about this. What, even a new product introduction, and we talked marketing activity. And then the question is, well, is operations really actually planning for
yeah,
what sales talked about to
what is
actually
the
happen?
actual response to that? Yeah,
Right, right.
in the plan.
And did we build that into the plan?
Yeah,
And there might be an astute conversation around that where somebody says, "Hey, wait a second, like did we put it in the plan?" But nobody's really forced to do that. Nobody's really forced to kind of actually make the numbers tick and tie on the way out. And so yeah, I think that's kind of my first point. If you just bring up the slide just for a minute, there is on that family by family piece, just as we talked about, it really forces you to connect the sales and the operations plan together. And I could go on to the other pieces of that, but it's really, the NPI, any product rationalization you're doing, any of your inventory plans, it forces you to get all of that stuff together by family.
yeah,
And just a caveat on this, if you go back to when we discuss what an S&OP family should be, it needs to be by constraint. And it's going to become maybe a little bit more obvious as we go through this why that's so darn important, right?
yeah. And that's a huge distinctive for our practice. That the end of the day, we got to be able to buy it or make it in order to ship it. So we want the family to be focused on that, the supply side constraints, but also we're still going to mirror or model, I should say, the demand streams. That's how we do it, right? The
Yep.
market facing go to market approach you use gets into your S&OP process, but not in the family. It connects
Yep.
to the family.
Yep, and I think you'll see a little bit, in this session, and I think probably in our live streams as we go on, as we pull up a couple of the 5-section sheets, you'll start to see why that becomes pretty important when we
Yes.
look at it. So it connects the things together. The other one that's super important is it forces the family definitions to be the same. I the number of times where I walk into an executive presentation and sales will present something, and they might even be using the same descriptor for the family. And then operations will talk about it, but they're not actually on the same page. They're not
Yeah.
the definition of what's in the family when sales talks about it is not the same as when operations talks about them. So by doing it family by family, and once again, the tool that we use for that 5-section sheet forces the math and the numbers to make sense. So the definitions have to be the same. So the products that are in the family have to be the same for both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
The other one that's big, and I kind of alluded to this, but the number of times where we have to, sales presents their nice story all the way through, and then we get to the operation side, and then they present. Well, then often we have to circle back to the previously presented sales or new product information and go, well, did we include that, marketing plan in here? Did we include that in? And so that really eliminates the need. And that's a real time suck when you're trying to get through the meeting
Yeah.
quickly, because you're coming back and like, the number of times where there's a lack of clarity and you end up debating what you're seeing is a real part of the challenge. And the last one that's on here, or maybe it's I think it's my second last one, is forcing you to a balanced plan. By putting it all together and driving that plan out and using a data-driven plan, it'll force you to actually have a balanced plan. And what
I
that
mean,
means,
that's
go
kind
ahead.
of the point, right? Of
Yes.
S&OP. Make
Yep.
those decisions, balance the plan, and then go do it. Go execute it.
Yep. And that balance plan really needs to go out for the whole planning horizons, which we're going to be talking about at a future date. But that's a real important part that happens. And you think about the fundamentals you talk about for S&OP, that one version of the truth. Everybody spouts that off. Doing it by family forces you to get to that one version of the truth. So my two things on the secret sauce. First one, you gotta do the presentation family by family. And if you do that, that starts to eliminate some of those time wasters of lack of clarity because sales and operations aren't talking in the same language. And so that's a huge part. So that's really the why family by family, part of the secret sauce. So that brings me to number two. Why do we use a standard presentation for each family? So I'm going to go through here, and we'll spend most of the time today talking about this because it's the what should you present
Yeah.
in there, right? But
The
why
details
should I
matter.
use what's that?
The details matter
The
about how.
details matter, right? And why should I use a standard presentation before we look at what should the standard presentation look like? The first one, and I used the term before, I said about sales and operations speaking the same language. Well, if I use a standard presentation as I move family by family, it also reduces the translation for participants as you look at a family presentation and you flip to the next family presentation. I kind of think about this as like listening to somebody with a completely different dialect. I'm Canadian. Marshall, you're American. We sometimes use different words, right? A boot and roof. There might be some things that might be a little harder to understand. But the challenge is that if I have a completely different presentation for each of my families, when a participant looks at it, they've got to go, "Oh, now what am I looking at?" Right? So following a standard format really helps the participants move from family to family. And why is this important? One of the things that I think is super important when you come to that executive presentation for sure is you want participants to come prepared.
Yes.
And if they have to go through and interpret a whole bunch of slides that are different for each family, I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to absorb that data, right? How
Yeah.
do you process it? And so if you have a standard presentation, you're removing the element of surprise and you're driving to, okay, if I look at this, I know what to expect and I can focus on the story and not on the what the heck does
Yeah.
this slide say, right?
When we get to the actual presentation, sometimes when we start a project, we get executives that say that's too much for me to digest in an executive meeting. But the real truth is it's the other way around. By having that standard presentation over and over, it's 12 columns, 12 months by 5 sections or some subsections if you want them, but it's not that much. And
Yep.
and then that rhythm you get into by looking at family by family is what allows you to sort of get facile by you don't get overwhelmed as an executive, and
Yep.
everybody else is prepared if you're doing it right.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think the other big part about that is and I think it's one of my points later on, but if I'm using that standard presentation, specifically the 5 section sheet, it also simplifies the accountabilities, right? So
Yeah.
everybody's presenting the same data the same way, and so when I'm sitting there as the senior executive and I'm thinking about the accountabilities, I know where I'm looking and I know what I'm holding them accountable to. And it's not different family by
Yeah.
family.
Actually, it just occurs to me though that clarity of connection is what gives you clarity of accountability, right? You know how things connect together between the sales side or the demand side and the supply side at enough granularity that you can actually say, well, hey, Joe, what's going on with this? If Joe's responsible for the miss in terms of getting the demand side, for example, and then
Yeah.
gives you something actionable. So
The other one that's so I think is really big is organizations change over time, right? And so you get new people coming in. You get you got a new VP of sales, and we're going through this with a couple of our large customers right now. Some significant transitions. Well, if you follow a standard presentation, think about how much more easy it is to bring someone into that.
Yeah.
And by doing that same type of presentation by family, right? It's like if you have to provide a rubric or a documentation of what people see, you can hand that to the person, or anybody that's in that meeting should be able to say, well, what are we looking at and what's the expectation? And it becomes so much easier to plug into the process.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge one, right? And that facilitates moving through a lot quicker in the presentation, right? Because it's pretty predictable, and there isn't that need to keep reinterpreting as you move from
Right.
family.
People's eyes go to the right place when they see it from the
Yep.
people who are used to it, and then the new person can get used to their eyes going to the right place
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, it might be good for me to mention there is a DBM book on implementing S&OP, and this is a big part of it. Just having that consistency of presentation, and then it's actually written in the form of a story where a new executive is learning an existing process and how that facilitates
Yep.
it. It's a great book. It's Sales and Operations Planning is the title of the book. It's on Amazon, and it's listed as the author is Duncan MacLeod, the original founder of DBM Systems.
Yep. Yep.
It's got a couple
And
of
yeah, a lot of what we're talking about here is covered in that book. So
yeah.
so we kind of answered why do you present family by family and why using a standard presentation. So now kind of the meat of this is, all right, what should be in that standard presentation? And so think about this as a framework. This is not everything, and this is not all necessary. But if you're sitting there today and you're going, man, like we struggle getting to the right level of detail and we just can't seem to get these family presentations, take this template as a starting point
Yeah.
and work with it from there. But I always say to people, be really brutal about your executive presentation, because what typically happens is you have a senior executive, or you have an issue, a new senior executive comes in, or you have an issue that comes up, and we add a slide to address that issue. And then that slide becomes part of the standard deck. And then 6 months later, someone goes, well, what does that slide mean? I don't know anymore. Right? Like it's a
Yeah.
bit of a challenge. So I like to provide kind of at least a starting template, and that really,
I mean,
go ahead.
ideally, this would be not ideally, but just to make this clear, what we're showing are potentially 7 slides in a
Yep.
deck for each family. That's
Yep.
what we're talking about.
Exactly. And I'll quickly take you through each of these. So the family characteristics, last month's performance, and you might be able to combine these together, some kind of summary for the family,
Yeah.
a discussion on risks and assumptions, right? Which is what's gone into the plan last month, just so I can actually validate those risks and assumptions this month to say, hey, were we, we've talked about this before. Did we miss the plan because things completely changed that we weren't expecting, or did we miss the plan because we made the wrong assumptions when we built the plan? And we better improve our assumption process, right? All that's kind of baked into the family plan, which is that second last the slide that's over there. This family plan here. This is really the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the presentation. What are your new risks and assumptions, and any action plans that come out? So what I thought I would do in the time that we have left is maybe go into a little bit of what these slides would look like, and maybe we can just discuss a little bit about them as we go on. So you might be thinking, family characteristics. What the heck are family characteristics? And so this is part of that idea of getting everybody on the same page. And so and I recommend having this slide, whether or not you even look at it month by month. In fact, in a mature process, I wouldn't even recommend looking at this. However, there's some pretty key things that are in here. So some ideas. So one is, what products are in the family? So a definition of what products are in our family, maybe a diagram, or, if you've got multiple sites, some idea of how they're related to each other. So if I've got one product family that's feeding into another product family, I'd like to kind of see that. What are the demand streams? You mentioned demand streams earlier, Marshall, right? So what are our key way of segmenting the demand? And that's typically going to be the top 3 or 4 customers. It might be distributors versus OEMs, something along that line. And that's really kind of the sales view, if you will.
Yeah.
Your buffer strategy, right? So this is such an important part that often gets missed. S&OP is about managing your buffers, setting a strategy and managing them. And so what are your buffers? Well, one of my buffers is lead time, right? Lead time is a strategic buffer between my shipments and my sales, right? My shipments and my orders. And so, understanding that buffer and where do I want that to be, and being able to monitor, is it going up or is it going down? Is it where we really want to be? That's an important part of that. So that buffer strategy should be expressed on here. Where do we want lead times to be? Inventory target. Everybody wants to talk about inventory reduction, but what's the target we need to handle the volatility between demand, right? And what we're going to send out, and what our capability is on supply. And that buffer is something we use in a seasonal business. It might be building the buffer and then consuming it, right? It might be, hey, we're planning for a shutdown. I've got to put that buffer in, all of those sort of things.
This is why we don't call it siop. If you call it siop, so be it. But
Yep.
our idea on that is it's a buffer. It's a derivative. You plan it as incidental to planning the strategic, direction of what you're trying to accomplish with that family, with those demand streams of those customers that are feeding that family. So the inventory is going to go where you point it, but you don't point it as the primary pointer.
Right.
It
Right.
derives from what happens.
Yep.
Which most people kind of know, but again, if there's a big focus on turns and inventory as a KPI that needs to move, then you can kind of get it backwards and start thinking about that rather than what are we trying to do. Inventory should just be a means to an end.
Right. And so part of this, and I could go through all of the ones that are on that slide, but the other one that's on there, upside flex, what your capability number is, the tolerances, what is the customer expected lead time. These are some examples. You have your frozen and firm scheduling zone, which is a great topic. We're going to cover that next. Yeah. And what are the kind of the RACI that's associated with this? What you can take out of this is that in order to put this slide together, you actually have to define and document, and I'm going to use the term operating parameters for the family. And to me, that's so fundamental in S&OP. It's like the S&OP plan is where you want to go. Well, where I want to go has got to have some overarching plan. When we talk about strategy and execution, we say, hey, it's the intersection between strategy and execution. The stuff that's documented on this slide, especially around this buffer strategy, our customer expected lead time, frozen, those are, that is the fundamental stuff, right? These are the levers you need to manage, or that you can manage.
Yeah.
And so this does not end up being a large discussion in the executive meeting unless you're really out of whack. But having it documented and having this slide and being able to kind of summarize this down to some level is just so important, especially when you bring new people in the meeting. And often when we've worked with people for a while, they put this in the back, right? And so when you come to the family by family piece, it's not like you put the slide up, because you know how it is in a meeting, right? If there's a slide and somebody's presenting, well, I sure as heck better talk about what's on the slide.
Yeah.
Well, that's not really what this is meant to be. This is meant to say, hey, have I got it documented?
If there's a change, let's talk about the slide, but otherwise we may not even cover this slide every time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Spend a lot of time on that one. It's kind of important, but when you look at it in the gist of the presentation, you're really not spending any time on this, but it's your grounding slide for the family.
Well, and then we find there's definitions behind these definitions that are really
Absolutely.
important to the business. Like they may not have their promise or their request date definition very precise. I mean, it's sort of getting set by somebody. It might have some variability over in customer service, and then they're actually driving some of their thinking about the business at a strategic level on something that's not even properly
Right.
isolated as a definition. So
Yep. This,
I think it's a
to
huge
me,
point.
yeah, to me, this helps to focus the plan and the discussion as you go forward. So it means we all know what we're talking about, right? Um, so next thing, and this often can be fairly quick, is what happened last month. So if you look at the slide here, we've got really three pieces: our bookings, shipments, and supply. And we've got a tolerance band, and we're saying what was the plan and what actually happened, right? And you can see if it's out of tolerance, we need to have a reason why that happened. And so, why is this important? Well, when we talk about measurements, probably sometime in November, we'll be talking about the effectiveness of the process and trying to get your measurements to be within the green, within predictability, right? And so, if you look at the example here, supply is low. Supply is much lower than what their plan was. And so, that's really a question that says, well, why did that happen? Right?
Yeah.
Either the plan was completely bogus or something drastic happened in this case because we're about 20% below what our plan was with those numbers. So this is really important, and you're not going to try to come up with the reasons in the exec meeting. All of the meetings that were prior to the exec meeting were about getting to the root cause of this. So that goes back to something we talked about in the last live stream, which was you got to allow time in between those meetings to do the root cause analysis, to get the answers. So when you come to this meeting, it's not like, we look at this slide and there's crickets because nobody knows what the heck happened last month,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
and it isolates. I mean, when you come to the meeting ready to explain, then you probably are coming to the meeting ready to talk about how to mitigate. I mean, that at least is
right,
going to crush your mind, and that's the purpose, right? You've now
yeah,
got something to sink your teeth into because you're going to have reds. It's just the way it's going to be. That's what S&OP is. It's not all green, and it's not punitive when there's a red, right? How many of our clients right now have component shortages that were unplanned, unpredictable?
yeah,
And so now they've got to deal with that. And we've seen everything from, fixed and firm orders for 12 months in order to serve an OEM set of clients to, uh, carrying more inventory. I mean, trying to find ways to increase upside flex in
yep.
terms of the workforce. That doesn't really address the components shortage, but there's just a lot of mitigation that happens when you get to this slide.
Absolutely. So last month's performance is an important step. Don't skip it, which really means that I've got to be able to quickly, when I'm putting my plans together, it's a forward-looking plan, but it's a focus on the last month's performance to start with. The next one that I like to do is some sort of family performance summary. I've sort of gravitated over the last while to using a chart similar to this, which is like a 12-month rolling average. So if you're looking at this, the gray is history. So that's like the last 12 months. And going forward is the next 12 months. And this is the total sum of the shipments over that period of time. And so the reason I like this is it takes seasonality out and it gives me an idea of, is the business growing or is the business level or is the business on decline? And so if you looked at this example, and this is just one that we've used, to help people when they're getting started, this is one where the business is on a decline. And so as I'm looking at that, it's like, to me, that's the gut feel check for the executive to say, well, is that really what we're expecting on the family? Kind of takes all the noise out and just says, like, does it go to where we think it's going to go? And if I had a budget in there, This green area would actually represent, I'd be able to see, and we didn't put a budget in the example I had here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's
But
going on with the budget? That
yeah,
you're
so
planning
because
to
they
do
don't have
much worse than you're
because
doing.
yeah, what would
Better.
what would happen is it would be dropping the 12-month ago of actual and adding the budget plan going forward. So you would see where the budget was. So not only can I see if the business is going up and down, I can also see, well, where did my budget happen to be? Right. And so that's a big one. And then I typically like to, if you've got some KPIs you're driving to, so whether that's lead time reduction or whether that's inventory right sizing, whether that's just trying to think of some other ones that you might be putting in there, but your typical KPIs, I recommend putting them here and doing it at the family level. Often we'll
Yes,
do a customer
very
service.
powerful.
Yeah, we do it. We might do it at an aggregate level, but the problem is now, how do I break it down to to a real actionable piece? Well, if you want it to be actionable, tie it to the family.
What's our client in Atlanta's the recent KPI they started putting in that I thought was pretty sharp? What was that? I thought
I,
you would know it, or else I wouldn't have asked.
yeah, I can't remember off the top of my
Oh, okay,
head.
my bad.
Yeah,
But it's obviously very. I mean, people get pretty creative with really isolating what's going to move the business forward with
right.
the right KPIs by family. So that's,
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
the point.
And by doing this, and I think your last point's really valid, is sometimes we have these overarching KPIs, but if you look at your product families or your S&OP families, they're going to be at different stages, and you're going to have different things are going to be necessary. And you might have a family where you're in a hugely competitive situation, and you're like, you know what? Inventory reduction for this family does not make sense, right?
Yeah, we
Because
need to
we've got
increase inventory.
right,
To
we got
shorten
short
lead times.
customer expected lead
Yeah,
times. We want to steal that market. Let's make sure we're driving to those things. So, what's the thing we want to measure on that? Well, we want to be measuring, maybe it's a bookings growth number, right? Where you're looking
yeah.
for a month over month bookings growth number. So, to me, this really helps. Once again, it focuses the conversation on what we're trying to drive to that. So I'm now not at this, I'm not at the, the high level, just what's the financial plan look like, but I'm not at the aggregate view of the whole business. I'm looking at it family by family. All right. So next one, this is another topic I can't remember. Did we cover risks and assumptions?
Yes,
I know we
we had
talked
a
about.
whole. Yeah,
Yeah, we did. We had a whole live stream on risk and assumptions. I seem to remember that. Yes. And so this is really saying what happened last month, and it's a follow up. So this is a blank sheet, but you can see this column over here says what was the result or the outcome. Why do I do this? Well, last month we put a plan together. We just measured ourselves against that plan with the actuals. Now the question is, we did the reasons, why that happened, and this is really a way of kind of accountability back into those assumptions. So, like, if the assumption was we're getting a new customer and they're going to be a 15% bump in sales, and that didn't happen, so we would see the new customer assumption here, and then we'd see that nope, they went to a competitor. We lost. We didn't get that business. And so what this is doing is helping you learn as an organization, how do you build your plan and what happened, and how do we do a better job of going through the plan.
in general, each one of these lines would have somebody who's kind of accountable for it, and that it's not a punitive thing. Again, we always look at this as a chance to figure out how to get better. But if you lost it to a competitor, maybe that's okay. Maybe the
Yep.
pricing that they wanted was below where you want to be in the market. That was a strategic decision. Maybe the executive was involved in it. So you end up with actionability from the accountability. I love this part of what we do. I think it's very powerful and could
And
be implemented outside of S&OP, in any planning cycle.
absolutely right. And there's a couple key ones in here that we covered off. You covered off the owner, but the other question was, did we put it in the plan or not? Right? Because there'll be some things you talk about. And this goes to that balanced plan. Remember, I said that circling back. Sales did their huge presentation. Now I'm going to circle back, and it's just like, oh, wait a second. Did operations include that big new customer in the plan?
Mm-hmm.
This actually kind of, at least that question gets asked. So you're thinking about, did I put it into the plan? So this is what you did all the heavy lifting last month. This is now a report out essentially on what happened. Often we don't end up discussing this slide a lot because it gets covered in the reasons for any kind of misses. However, go back to the thing I mentioned about why I do family by family and why having a standard presentation is important. You're sending the deck out ahead of time, or however you're putting the presentation together.
You should be. Yep.
You should be. And if you are, then I can go through this and I'm getting a story for the family. I know what's in the family, right? I know kind of what the objectives for that family are, right? I now know what happened last month. I kind of know overall where the family's going. I know what was built into our last month's plan. And then comes the piece de resistance, if you will. It's the actual plan for the family. That was a great segue, wasn't it, Marshall?
Yeah. I don't know what a piece de resistance is. No.
That's a little bit of my French. You had to translate that. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this for today, because we're actually planning on we'd like to do some other sessions that are really about the 5-section sheet. And I think, Marshall, your comments about the book as a resource, if you want to know more about the 5-section sheet, look for the book. It's the S&OP how to build a process that everyone can understand, and it really focuses on the powerful part of this of the presentation. And when I talk about a balance plan, right, I'm really talking about that 5-section sheet, right? And just maybe pull it up for 1 second, because I'll just go through, quickly a couple things on here. So the first part of that is bookings. That is the purview of sales. I've got what happened. So I've got historical view of bookings, and I've got a book forecast going forward, developed by sales.
In units by family.
In units by family. And I go to the next section, which is shipments. And that really is in this case, it is my agreed upon shipment plan that's going out there. And that would have been arrived at least the constrained shipping plan would have been arrived at after you went through the demand meeting, after you went through the supply meeting, and at the pre-exec meeting, you came up with here's our best take at what a constrained shipment plan looks like going forward. And it's supported by my aged customer backlog, which is just, kind of right underneath there. Right. And when I talk about a balanced plan is, if I had to constrain that shipment plan, I would actually see a calculation going forward that would be showing my backlog as increasing, because my bookings are what sales expects for customer orders. My shipments are what we're capable of shipping out, what we've agreed to that we can ship out based on orders and based on capability. And the difference between those over time is going to go into my backlog. So if I see my backlog growing, I know that I've constrained my shipping plan, and I can see that. And what's the impact of the backlog growing? It's going to be my lead times start to get pushed out. And so what's so powerful about this is, if you think of an objective where you're trying to reduce lead times, and you don't have a balanced plan that respects capability, if you don't have a balanced plan that respects capability, and you've got the build plan, I'm going to know I'm going to start to see where I've got problems in the plan. Bookings, shipments, I've got my production, and unfortunately on this one that I grabbed, I just realized as I'm looking at it, I didn't actually include the capability line on here. We'll cover that in a couple of the other sessions, but I need to have my capability view to make sure that my production plan isn't above my capability. And that is all part of what happens in the pre-S&OP meeting, is in the supply meeting, to make sure you've got that done. But same thing going forward. I have an inventory calculation going forward. I'm doing a really rudimentary finished goods inventory calculation where I take my current inventory, right? I add in what I'm going to produce. I subtract what I'm going to ship, and I can run that forward as an inventory plan. So if the plans aren't balanced, and you can see on the example I have here, I get out to October, I'm starting to run negative inventory. And that means that out in October, my shipments are greater than my production plan. Now, on this case, the reason happens to be that I haven't actually driven my production plan out further in October and November. We just ended in October. This
This is
snapshot,
a real
Marshall.
client
Yeah,
example.
this
I mean,
snapshot
obviously
had
it's
to be
part of the data.
was
Yeah.
yes, and it was surprising or not surprising. October was the September was the last year of the plan, and we're going to talk
Yeah.
about horizons. But this
And that is
is
a no-no, but there's
yeah,
big no-nos and there's no-nos we live with while we're trying to implement.
right, exactly. So I don't want to go through all the detail on this, but
Sure.
trust me to say that getting an executive to look at the richness in this model, that's the
Yeah.
data supported model, so that they can look at it, you can quickly decipher what's going on. We also do this same view in a graphical view. So it's basically all the same information. There's 5 charts, which is really the 5 sections. We actually include the last month's performance on there. So people will use this as a view as well, as a way, and you can interpret pretty much the same way as you do on the
There,
5
there,
section sheet.
there
But
are some benefits to using this, and there are some benefits to not using this, I guess. So maybe both is. It
yeah,
seems to me that both is always pretty helpful. I
yeah,
like it when executives are able to read the numerical 5 section sheet because they're kind of getting used to the numbers. And we always say that they have to kind of experience this, but when we start, we make sure they realize that you're going to really key in on changes every month to the five
right,
section sheet. It's not you're digesting every number on that every month, and that's why
yeah,
we roll months.
yes, absolutely. So the point being, this slide and this slide are really the crux of that family presentation. That's doing exactly what we said were the things we wanted to get out of the family view is, a common. So you can see that I'm really forcing all those pieces to come together. They've,
Yes.
the family's got to be defined the same way, right? And you got to be able to walk out of there with either going, holy smokes, the plan was nowhere close to being balanced, and we got to deal with this, right? Or nope, we got a balanced plan, and these are the concerns I've got about that. And by the way, we use this in high volume consumer products. We use this in large projects. I actually use it to run my business, which is really a project based business as well, as we
Sure.
implement S&OP for people. So yeah, it works.
Yeah, it does work.
So yeah,
Yeah, folks who have intelligent demand streams coming from big box stores, and that's their only type of client. Big box stores and Amazon, it works, and it works for people who are building nuclear power plants
yep,
or supporting that. So
yep. All right. So go through those 2 pieces. I usually like to bring in what are the risks and assumptions behind the plan. Often, once again, these have gotten talked about when there was some discussion around the plans. But it's good to have them here as a document. And actually, we're working with a client right now who doesn't actually put a presentation together. They actually have they kind of have a what do you call it, PDF that goes out that really has all of these elements in it, and then they're using a dynamic view of each one of the families as they go through. So we have a tool that will you can flip from family to family, and they do that, and it's got some drill down capabilities, and so that just really helps make this so you're not always just cutting and pasting stuff into a PowerPoint. So all depends
we
on how
always use
you
the
do it.
DVM tool, but if you could do this in Excel or whatever tool you're
Absolutely.
using, but
Yeah.
the dynamic view of this.
Yeah. So these are the current risks and assumptions. And if you're kind of paying attention, you would realize we're going to revisit these in the next month when we come back to them. And then really the last part for that family piece is what are any of the strategic actions for this family or cleanup actions? And then what we'll ask is a sign off for that particular family presentation. So, I mean, I think that kind of covers off what I wanted to cover there, Marshall, at least in my presentation piece. I don't know if you've got any other things that you sort of felt I didn't.
No, let's, if you don't mind, flip back to the to the slide that shows all of them, and then I'll put that up once you get there and folks can see.
You mean all the things that are in the presentation?
Yeah, the things that we would want to see for every family in the presentation. And
Yep.
just as a reminder, we're saying you should go through the presentation by family. That doesn't mean you don't cover demand and sales and then cover supply or operations, but it does mean you do that by family. So you keep, flipping back and
Yep.
forth. And I think that's really
Yep.
powerful.
Yep. And I think if you have these, right now, like I said, family characteristics, you may not even really actually talk about that one, right? You just want to have it there. That really facilitates the process. Last month's performance, critical, right? Because you're trying to build credibility in the organization that we put a plan together and we deliver to the plan. Real critical. That family summary, some view of that, I like really putting the KPIs in there. That really kind of focuses us on what we're trying to get done. If I go to the last month's risks and assumptions, typically that'll be pretty quick. The family, a lot of time is spent on this, the family plan, right? And you'll discuss the risks and assumption as part of them, but at least they're documented in there.
Yeah.
And really, if you do the work in the meetings beforehand, and you can see that while that family plan looks complex, but if it's the same for each one, I know that when I look at the aged bookings and I look at that booking plan going forward, I can immediately tell what's happening, right? Because if the bookings, I've got my age bookings, age backlog, sorry. I said bookings, I meant age backlog. If I've got my age backlog in there, right? And I look at my first month shipments and I can quickly tell, because a lot of people in their mind will have an idea. If I've got 75% of my orders booked coming into the month, I'm going to hit my plan for the month. I can see that right on that. I can see that right on there. Are we in good shape coming into the month? Right?
Yeah.
It's there. And then if I look forward and I see the bookings are growing, I know I'm constrained, or the backlog is growing. I know I'm constraining my plan. Right? And so I have a way to, and if my plan is to reduce lead times, well, then that forces me to make my supply line higher
Yeah.
than what my my planned shipments might be, or what my bookings are, and how that translates to the shipments. I've got to do that, and then I've got to actually execute that plan, which might mean pulling backlog forward, right? All of those things that you want to do. So I could go on. That's kind of the crux of that, but hopefully that kind of helps people see how do you do this in that period of time. And I
Mhm.
know, people say, well, it's counterintuitive. You're actually asking them to look at more detail, and yet you're getting it through faster.
It
But
is faster
it is faster. It's
consistently.
faster
Okay.
because it's consistent, right? It's forcing both parts of the story to be in one place, and it's either balanced and I'm good with it, or it's not balanced, and
We
we
got to
can
fix it.
quickly say we got work to do before the next cycle to get this thing balanced.
And your eye, your mind, whatever the process is, you're focusing more on what's changed. So maybe it takes a couple hours. I mean, we've had some early executive S&OP meetings that took 3 hours or
Yep.
something, crazy. We actually come into clients that have 3 and 4 hour executive S&OP meetings and get them down to an hour and a half with multiple families.
Yeah.
Some of these family presentations I've been in that cover those items are 5 or 10 minutes long because everything's working. The
Yeah.
balance plan is producing the results. We're not changing a lot of it. Everybody's on the same page. The new thing where we're doing some NPI and that's getting introduced, then that gets the 20 minutes of time.
Yep.
Or the thing that's being affected by supply chain shortages, that gets extra time.
Yep.
So good
Yeah.
stuff, Doug. Oh, go ahead.
And just you made me think of one thing,
Yeah.
because when we're helping people implement a process, you're right. When we think about this, if you're sitting and you've got a certain way you're doing it, we say, wait a second, you got to change the way you present, you got to change the way that presentation comes together. We actually don't do that for all the families to start with. We'll do that for a family, and it's going to take for one, and you got to think about you're trying to teach the organization, build the muscle memory about how do you do this presentation. So don't expect the first time you go through it. And so we'll often in that pilot, if people don't have a process, we often have a half hour to an hour presentation on that one family, not because that's the objective of where we're trying to get to. It's because you're really trying to make sure everybody is very comfortable with those elements of the presentation that are there. And so, you're really trying to get them to the point that, it's not a question of what the heck I'm looking at, right?
Yeah, it's like
Right.
when we do lean transformation stuff, we like to start in a model area and start getting some organizational learnings and some rhythms, and that helps upper management and mid management start to see the benefits and the way it connects, and how do tier huddles flow, and how does
Yeah.
PDCA work in the organization in a real basis, and then you can move it out.
Yeah.
We're very like minded with the SNOP implementation process.
Yeah. And
Doug, why don't you tell everybody what the next what does good look like presentation look like? That'll be the fourth Thursday in September.
yeah.
And what is that going to be?
Yeah, so we're going to actually talk about planning horizons. I did mention it a little bit as we talked here, like about the family I brought up where it dropped off at the end of the year. So we'll talk about planning horizons. That gets into not the it's a little bit more of the nitty gritty of the plan and kind of how you think about that. So, all right, I think that's
Sounds great.
what I wanted to cover. Oh, I guess we did want to mention. Because we launched it early in September, right? The all the topics that we're going through. If I go back to those 8 topics that were at the very top, they are all part of our online assessment, right? And so that got launched, I guess, a week ago, beginning of September. And so, if
Check it out.
check it out. Go
Use
on,
it.
you can do it. It's
free.
Yep. And it really kind of covers these topics. Some of the output from it will be some documentation. You'll get some documentation on kind of best practices. So some of the things that we're talking about here. And then if you're not sure about something that's come out of there, tune into the live streams because we'll be actually talking about it a little bit more. So between that, that could be part of building some new muscle memory in your organization. Kind of get.
And you can find it at BEZAperformance.com. I've got it on the screen for everybody. But until next time when we look at planning horizons, thanks again, Doug. And that's it for today's BEZA live stream. Thanks.
All right.